Okay, good evening, Council. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving weekend and Thanksgiving holiday. It is the City Council regular meeting for 6:30 p.m. Tuesday, December 1st, 2020. We are almost done with 2020, thank goodness. And a call to order, Mr. Sugg.
Mayor Moran.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Present.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Present.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Here.
Councilmember Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Stewart.
Here.
And Councilmember Treen.
Here.
Great. Meeting accessibility. Pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual City Council meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment is able to be submitted. To view live, the city website is www.sammamish.us/TV21. You can view it on YouTube and also on Comcast Channel 21 within Sammamish only. To view later, meeting videos are available the day after the meeting. City website, again, is www.sammamish.us/TV21 on YouTube and Comcast Channel 21 within Sammamish only. Pledge of Allegiance. And Councilmember Ritchie. You want to lead us?
Happy to, Mayor. Thank you for the honor. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, first up, we have approval of the agenda, so I'm looking for a motion.
I'd like to move approval of the agenda with the removal of item number 28, which is the Burke Consulting Contract Amendment.
Okay, can you repeat that? It was just really muffled.
Yep, I said I'd like to move approval of the agenda with the removal of item number 28, which is the Burke Consulting Contract Amendment.
Okay.
Second.
Second. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor of the agenda with the removal of 28?
As amended. Aye. Aye.
Okay, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we've got a 7-0. Okay, next up, we have got our emergency management coordinator. So, Mr. Andrew Stevens, could you give us an update on COVID, please?
Yes, good evening, Mayor, council members, city manager. My name is Andrew Stevens. I'm the emergency manager with Eastside Fire and Rescue. As someone who has been immersed in COVID-19 response and recovery since February, it was extremely disheartening to see millions of U.S. residents during the worst COVID surge yet travel and gather together over the past holiday weekend. While this was frustrating to me, I can only imagine how the frontline medical workers who have been pushed to the brink fighting this virus must have felt to see so many ignore the warnings from public health officials and to limit contact and to not to travel. November was a tough month for the U.S.'s pandemic response, and by all expectations, December is going to be worse. The United States reported more than 4 million coronavirus cases in November, which is higher than the total number of cases seen all year by any other country in the world except India and Brazil. Public health experts are warning that we will continue seeing record-breaking numbers in the final month of 2020. The nation surpassed 100,000 daily cases for the first time on November 4th, and then more than 200,000 daily cases for the first time on November 28th. And over the last weekend, the U.S. also surpassed 90,000 coronavirus hospitalizations in a single day for the first time ever. The country now sits at roughly 13.7 million cases, up 2.4 million in the past 2 weeks alone. And there are roughly 270,000 deaths. State of Washington, King County, and Sammamish all saw massive increases of COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations throughout November as well. And while the surge may appear to be somewhat decreasing, the data over the past several weeks is incomplete, or this past several days is incomplete. Many testing centers were temporarily closed over the holiday weekend, and the data does not yet reflect the number of individuals exposed at holiday gatherings but are not yet symptomatic. With an incubation period of up to 2 weeks, public health officials are expected even greater increases in COVID cases over the next several weeks. City of Sammamish has now seen 555 cases of COVID-19. That is up 213 from November 1st. A 62% increase in total cases in the last month alone. Sammamish residents have been feeling the impacts of COVID for nearly 10 months now and are 2 weeks into additional restrictions that will last until mid-December or longer. To help guide the City Council on how they may elect to continue its continued community support, staff released a COVID-19 impact survey to gauge and identify the needs of those affected by both COVID and the COVID-19 mitigation measures. And so far, 367 residents have completed the assessments. And here are some of the few key takeaways from that survey so far. 9.5 respondents stated that they are recently unemployed due to COVID. That's a combination of folks that also elected to leave work because their children are home doing school. 15% of respondents are experiencing extreme or high levels of financial related stress. There were 20 respondents who were very concerned with their continued ability to pay for housing. There were 74 respondents who were also very concerned about their mental health and wellness. And of all the various concerns we rated, and there were several, 73 stated that these concerns began with the COVID-19 pandemic, and roughly 12% are due most recently to the most recent statewide closures. So wanting to capture an even larger response pool and in an effort to reach more vulnerable populations, the city is also mailing postcards promoting this survey to every household in the city. We are encouraged by the early participation in the survey and hoping that residents will continue to participate over the next several weeks. To date, the city has spent roughly $1,080,000 on its COVID-19 response and recovery operations, leaving roughly $1.8 million in funding that was earmarked for continued COVID-19 response and recovery efforts. This survey, in combination with feedback provided by the city's Human Services Coordinator, provides insight into where additional support is needed. It is my understanding that the council is looking to release the second round of business grants at its next regular meeting. It would also be my recommendations to review and decide upon parameters for additional support to human services organizations serving those impacted soon. Depending on whether certain federal programs expire in late December, will weigh considerably on the amount and type of assistance that may be needed. Also, as I'm sure you're aware, there is not yet an authorized or approved vaccine for COVID-19. However, there are multiple vaccines under development that are providing some promising results. Even if a vaccine is approved for emergency distribution, it will not be widely available for many months. The first supply of vaccine will be limited and given first to specific groups that are at the highest risk, such as healthcare workers and people in nursing homes. And the state of Washington and King County Public Health have been working to establish plans, procedures, and the logistical systems needed for the eventual vaccine distribution. And when the vaccine is widely available, we're expecting to see healthcare clinics, pharmacies, and drive-through and walk-through clinics all able to provide vaccinations. In the meantime, though, it is important that everyone continues to practice all COVID-19 non-pharmaceutical mitigations. It may be several more months until there is widespread vaccination across populations, so all steps must be taken to slow it down now. Lastly, I would like to urge all residents listening to download and utilize the new COVID-19 exposure tool, Washington Notify, or WA Notify, on their smartphones. This tool utilizes anonymous data to alert you if you were in the presence of someone who tested positive for COVID-19. It is safe, it is secure, and it will greatly assist in contact tracing abilities that previously would not have existed. It's just one more tool in our toolbox to help slow the spread of this virus. Thank you.
Okay, Council. Let's see if we've got some questions here. Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for that update. A couple of questions. First one, you said that for the survey, you sent postcards to everyone in the city. In doing so, is there a way for people to participate in the survey if they don't have internet access?
That is actually a limited capability. Under different circumstances, I would say non-pandemic circumstances, we'd be able to place people in some of these most vulnerable areas to conduct these via person. There is an option in the survey for people to contact, and on the postcard as well, for people to contact the city if they need help or need assistance in some sort of accessibility issue if they don't have it. So the postcard also does have additional languages on it, linking them to this. So if someone does not have access to internet, I knew that was one of my concerns going into this, because again, if you're probably one of the most vulnerable people, you may not be tracking or you may not have that ability. At the same time, there has been a big push by providers to get people internet for free during this pandemic, simply because so many people are having to use it for school and for work. So there are some low-cost internet options. But if there is someone who doesn't have that ability, they can still call into the city, be connected with our human services coordinator or myself, and we can walk them through that over the phone.
Okay, so and that information's on the postcards that you sent out.
There is some information on that postcard that drives people to the city hall if they can't reach us.
Okay, that's great. I really appreciate that, because I do feel like the people that are struggling the most may have the hardest time responding to the survey. So it would be great to be able to reach out to them. But I appreciate you guys sending that, since not everybody is online and checking that. And then you also mentioned the app that's available in Washington State. Is that something that we could get up on Sammamish Connects and onto like our website and our Facebook page, so that we can help to spread that word and get that out there? I think that will help people, especially if we can provide them a link where it can explain how it works, so people know that it's not going to be tracking them personally or collecting personal information. I think that would be really great as well, if you could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it actually might be shared already, but I will verify.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Okay, thanks, Celia. I appreciate that.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. First off, I believe it was our emergency manager's birthday yesterday, so happy birthday, Andrew. Secondly, more importantly, I was wondering if I could get your input on the what you see as the participation from the residents of Sammamish in the COVID requirements, mask wearing, and things like that. I seem to, when I'm around town, it seems almost universal that people are following these safety procedures. And I'm just wondering if I could have your observations on what you see around town and whether you see any areas for improvement within Sammamish.
Yes, I appreciate the question, Councilmember, and thank you for the birthday wishes. I do see a lot of compliance. I do see a lot of people outside keeping their distance, wearing masks. I think it's well known throughout some of the public health studies that it's not always those interactions that are your most, where you're at your most vulnerable. It's in your homes. It's with your friends. It's, gathering with a close neighbor who, and it's slowly expanding those pods where it might have just been you and your immediate family in the past, in the early onset of this pandemic. And now some people have gotten a little bit more complacent, where they're comfortable with one or two neighbors, and those neighbors might have one or two other pods, or a child in daycare, or a child in school, or something that before you know it, your immediate pod has grown from 3 people to 20, So it's those interactions. It's, within family units where you see a lot of community spread as well. So it's not necessarily what you're doing when everyone else is looking. It's what you're doing at your own house. That, is, I think, a core driver of this, because now with the levels we're seeing of community spread, it's out there. You can assume that every day, if you were interacting with people outside your home at a large level, or even 10, 15 people, that you possibly came in contact with someone who had COVID-19. The federal COVID specialist, Dr. Burke, said if you gathered over Thanksgiving weekend, you can basically assume that you have it. You should quarantine. You should wait 3 or 4 days and get tested. That's how widespread it is right now in America.
Yeah. Okay, great observations and great advice. Thank you on that, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Mayor, could I ask the emergency manager a question? Today, you may have been on the call, but I heard from King County Health that whereas we were used to be measuring whether or not we went into the next stage, if we were over 50 people per 100,000, it was concerning, and the number got up to 75, and we just knew then we weren't coming back, going to break into stage 3 to where we would be opening up. And today, I think she used a number like 425 per 100,000 versus the 50 or 75 we used to talk about and be concerned about. Could you comment?
No, I mean, 100% agree. The numbers we're seeing now daily they're breaking records. We are nowhere near even where we were 2 months ago when, we were considering, organized sports. What is a safe or what is a high-risk sport under 75, like you said, being able to possibly open schools. There were schools in our community that had plans to do that in late fall, winter, because we were on that downward trajectory. Having the cases now, we are nowhere near to a point where it's going to get better for a while until people really stop what they're doing. The skate park this afternoon, going back to Councilmember Gamblin's question, it was packed. You got to make better decisions for yourself and for your family. And while you might think that this is outdoors and it's safe, there's a lot of heavy breathing going on. There's a lot of things happening and not a lot of masks. I walked out there the other day with, a couple hundred masks and just started giving them to kids, telling them to put them on. So I was getting some side eye from parents, but hey, it's got to be done, So the community spread is to a point now where it is very concerning. And unfortunately, I don't think everyone's at that level of fear yet because they don't see that the hospitals are at capacity. We are nearing the same levels of hospitalizations from COVID and the capacity that we were in the very beginning of this. And 10 months in, we shouldn't be doing that. We should know better, for sure.
Okay, Andrew, I actually had 2 questions for you. First one is, how many people replied to the survey so far?
Roughly, I think it's 367, Mayor.
Okay.
It's been open for about a week now.
And then you gave 2 other stats that I wanted to ask you about, was the number of people that became unemployed, and then that also included elected to become unemployed. Was that 9.5% or is that 9?
Is 9.5%, and that was a combination of a few different questions. Some people saying that they were unemployed directly due to COVID. Some say they were furloughed, or they quit, or they reduced their own hours as well.
Okay, and then there was one, and I didn't get a chance to write it down. What was 15%?
15% of the respondents, they're either experiencing extreme or high levels of financial related stress.
Okay.
And there's several other questions within there that kind of where we ask questions about specific concerns. Are you worried about access to health care, access to food, access to housing, transportation. I think some of the key ones were, ability to pay for housing, obviously, and, a good concern. A lot of people, I'd say the number one concern of the community, and it's roughly 50% of the people, they're just worried about getting COVID. So that is obviously, it's a factor. I'm hoping it drives their own, decisions.
I encourage people to be safe. I have my family's in the Midwest, but 3 of them have COVID, and they didn't have the ability to take them into the hospital. So one of them got to be, but she's really not doing well. The other ones were sent home and told we don't even have room in the hallways. So
yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. That we don't want to get to a point where we cannot, again, bring COVID patients into a hospital because all of our beds are full and the hallways are full and temporary field hospitals are full. We don't want to get there, and we're really close.
Okay, we have another question. Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, sorry about this. I just wanted to follow up, Andrew. On the Sammamish Connect, or Connect Sammamish, it doesn't say when the survey will close. So how long is that survey going to be open for?
We're going to we haven't decided yet. We wanted to make sure we had enough time for the mailers to get into people's hands. One good tool of the survey, via Connect, it allows you to capture a snapshot in time. So we can look at the data now. We can know when people completed the survey, basically. So we can.
I just wanted to share with people so they know how much time they had, was really kind of more of what I was getting at. And then the second question was, when did those postcards go out? Because again, we'll need to give people some amount of time after they receive those postcards to be able to fill this out. It sounds like we're getting great information from this, so I think it's great, and I just want to make sure we're able to get as big of a survey pool as possible.
No, the cards have not been mailed yet. MailPost has been printing them and is working on the distribution for us now. It took us just a few days to actually get the distribution, get the wording right, get the translation, in order. But they will be out early next week or over the weekend.
Okay. Great. And then since we do have information, and I know that we haven't closed the survey, but over 300 respondents is a pretty decent sampling from our city. That's a pretty decent sampling size. Is this information that you guys might be bringing back to us before the end of the year? Because as you mentioned, a lot of the benefits will expire on December 31st, and it is not looking positive for the federal level to necessarily get anything else passed before the existing assistance expires. So is this something that we feel like we need to take action for before the holidays?
I can definitely share the results that we currently have with all the council members even tonight.
Okay.
And that way you can begin to look at however you may want to assess that. I do know that the quarterly reports from the human services organizations, the third quarter has come out, and they're starting to review those. Some of the needs that we've identified based on the feedback from Rita was, a crisis line has been receiving a lot more calls over the third quarter. But really, I think the concern from a lot of the organization is what's going to happen if new federal stimulus doesn't happen post the day after, Christmas. So I think it might be really smart to come back maybe the first meeting in January with an assessment, understanding where, what federal guidance or what federal funds have been passed or not, and have a strategy then. Similarly, we've seen other jurisdictions kind of allocate a lump sum of money towards human services, and then let the staff kind of direct. It's a little bit more fluid, a little bit more agile. If they recognize a need, then they can support it right then.
That's not a bad idea, maybe before the holidays, in case some crisis comes up. That may be something we want to consider, to have an emergency pool of funding. Because, again, I'm not optimistic that anything is going to pass before the end of the year. and I do worry about people over the holidays. So thank you for that. The only last question I have is just in regards to trying to protect our staff, because I know so many of you are still working and some people do still have to come in. Do we have any sort of procedure that if people did travel or get together with family over the holidays, that they stay out of City Hall for some period of time to protect those who are working?
No, they are it's following the same COVID mechanisms that we've had in place since March. So it is, frequent health screenings. Staff are now reporting if they're symptomatic or they've been exposed to anyone. They're self-quarantine, isolating. They're working with the HR department for assistance if needed. We've not mandated, or the city has not mandated any sort of forced isolation if someone traveled.
No, but what we...
Okay. Well, I'm going to make the request. Yeah.
What we have been doing is ensuring that our staffs socially distance, field workers wear masks, use separate vehicles when possible, work in separate working areas, all of those types of things. And they've been very conscientious about that. And the only exposures that we've had from COVID have been those employees who got exposed by the outside means, usually with family.
Yeah, well, I'll make the plea then, if there are any people who traveled or got together with family over the holidays, don't bring it into City Hall, because we don't want to share. And in this case with COVID, sharing is not caring. Sharing is the opposite of caring. So thank you for that update, and I do hope everyone heeds the warnings. Thank you so much.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Andrew this evening? Okay, I'm seeing none. Thank you. Great report.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, next we have public comment, and pursuant to the Governor's Emergency Proclamation 20-25, the city is unable to provide an in-person location for the public to listen to the virtual City Council meeting this evening. Meetings are still accessible to the public, and public comment is able to be submitted. Written public comment is accepted until 5 p.m. on the day of the meeting. Submit your written comments by email to the city clerk at lhatchie@sammamish.us and the city council at citycouncil@sammamish.us. Verbal comment up to 3 minutes. A verbal comment may be provided per person live during the meeting. Call the following number and input the access code when prompted by 6:30 p.m. the day of the meeting. Phone number 1-571-317-3122. The access code 929-348-197. Once you have joined, you will be placed on mute. The meeting operator will unmute you when it is your turn to comment. You will hear an automated voice say unmuted when that occurs, and the operator will ask you to begin your comment. If you would like to hear, or if you would like to provide public comment on the public hearing, please say so when you are unmuted. You will be placed back on mute, and you will have an opportunity to speak when we are at the public hearing. Mr. Sugg, do we have public comment this evening?
We have one caller this evening.
Excellent.
All right. So just repeating some of what the mayor just said, I will unmute callers in the order they joined the meeting. When it's your turn, you will hear an automated voice say unmuted, and you'll have 3 minutes to provide comment. If you have called in to provide comment on the public hearing, please say so when you're unmuted. That's item number 27. And then I'll place you back on hold and return to you when the council reaches that hearing. Please state your comment by stating your name and the city you live in for the record. And I will now unmute our first caller. All right, caller, have you called for public comment or for the public hearing or both?
Both.
All right, please begin your public comment.
Good evening, council members. My name is Mary Lister, and I've lived in Sammamish for 20 years. I wanted to provide a little bit of data as part of the public comment based on some of the discussions and questions that were really excellent, which were brought up at a recent Planning Commission meeting on November 5th. They had asked about like the number of projects that are going on in the city, and I understand there's still quite a bit of permitting work that's been in the queue that staff is dealing with. And I also wanted to make you aware that like the Tamarack area that I live in has 40 vacant lots remaining. The Englewood area, I've told you 50 in the past, but I do understand that there are lots trying to build on 25-foot by 100 square foot lots, which is a 2,500 square foot lot in an R4 area, which would basically put it at R17. And when it's built, there's quite a lot of them. And from the last information I got from the King County assessor, it looked like I think there were about 160 lots in Englewood left. A lot of them are in very constrained areas with one or more critical areas of steep slopes, erosion, landslide hazard, and they are trying to build and taking down a lot of trees when a single house builds. So I would make you aware, just between Englewood and Tamarack, you have about 200 lots that are outstanding, and there are places trying to build. There also are reasonable use exceptions. Recently, a reasonable use exception, which had been approved by the city, was remanded back based on inputs and hearing examiner's review. And you've heard recently from another citizen, a lady who calls, I don't know her name, but it's down on the lake. She's been expressing issues about conservation areas along the lake. And Lake Sammamish has vacant lots as well as Beaver and Pine Lake do. So there's still quite a few existing lots in the city that were they were platted or existed before subdivision regulations were originally kind of the comprehensive ones were first adopted by the state in 1969. And whenever those houses go or somebody tries to build, you end up with an existing lot that doesn't necessarily get subdivision regulations. So tonight you'll hear as part of the public hearing some requests for things that are done for short plats, which are 2 to 9 lots, or major subdivisions, which are 10 lots or greater, also known as a long plats, that you would consider. There are a lot of single-family residences that have not been receiving the same requirements as you typically get in a subdivision, and that should help you understand the recommendations for tonight. So anyway, the Planning Commission did recommend 2 of the docket items, and I just wanted to give you the background data for at least Tamarack and Englewood. There's 200 lots, and with around the lake, there's probably at least 300, and there's more citywide that are larger lots. So please keep that in mind as you move forward tonight for the public hearing on the 2021 docket item. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have executive session, but it's only if needed. So is there any other questions that the council has that they did not have answered regarding the Jaron case? Okay, then we're going to move forward. Next up, we have consent calendar. So looking for a motion for the consent calendar.
Second.
I'd like to remove items 21 and 22, please.
Okay. Okay, we have a first and a second and a removal of 21 and 22. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the consent calendar as amended, say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We will move 21 and 22 down to right after the public hearings. Actually, why don't we just deal with them right away since we're right there. Okay. So we've got 21 and 22. Since we're right there, let's just deal with them. Okay, first up is the 21, which is the supplemental agreement for legal services. And who would like to speak to that? Mr. City Manager?
Hi, Mayor, members of council. Agenda Bill number 21 on consent was for consideration of a supplemental agreement for legal services with Eglick and Whited regarding the Growth Management Act concurrency and related land issues. This contract was originally for $49,999 and was to be used for other things other than the Jaron matter was used on a number of land use issues, Growth Management Act related, and other such things. The current billing, once we went through that, was approaching right at $48,000 without the current billing, and we needed to do two things. Both of these contracts should be extended into next year, and this particular one, it's recommended that we add another $49,999 or $50,000 to this contract so that we have headroom in there for addressing billing. Mr. Eglick and his partner, Josh, have assisted us with any number of growth management issues outside of Jaron and have guided us recently on other issues in the Community Development Department, including matters associated with STCA.
So personally, I'm not in favor of approving just a blank check. I think if we have a specific use, that's great. Let's talk about what we need the funds for, but we've got two separate contracts for the same law firm that are basically just open-ended, and I don't think that that's how we should be spending the money again. In 2020, we increased our legal fees by over $1 million a year, and I think we should be looking to reverse that trend.
Mayor, in response, I would say they're not any more open-ended than the contract that you've had with Kenyon and Deason and or with Madrona. Attorneys who were at Kenyon and left to do their own firm, a contract was set for them to handle issues related to land use in community development outside of just the Jaron matter. And we currently still use some attorneys outside of Lisa Marshall in the Kenyon law firm to handle code enforcement. This particular one has been in, I think my assessment, essential to help us sort through and make sure that staff does an outstanding job, and a lot of that getting second looks from legal counsel, both Lisa and Peter, will pay big dividends so that we don't err and have helped us sort out things separate from the Jaron matter. I think staff would agree with that.
Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, I move that the city execute a supplemental agreement with Aglet and Whited LLC to extend the current contract legal service.
Second.
Okay, discussion. And hang on, Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, the first $49,999 was requested by the city manager to get him up to speed on the Growth Management Act, and that it's been expanded into other things. I think that, again, I'm not necessarily opposed to it if we could get a little bit more specifics and maybe be able to provide some transparency to the community on what this is being spent on. As of now, we haven't been able to provide that transparency to the community, and I think that before we start, again, writing big checks to lawyers, again, doubling our legal fees from the prior year, from 2019, then we should have some more detail. So I am fundamentally opposed with writing blank checks, especially because we have two to the same law firm that are equally vague.
Okay, do we have any other comments? Okay, seeing and hearing no other comments. To me, these look very similar to what we've done in the last few years. So, hearing none, I'm going to call for the vote then. So, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Roll call.
Roll call it, please.
Mayor Moran,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Malchow,
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin,
Aye.
Councilmember Ritchie,
No.
Councilmember Ross,
Aye.
Councilmember Stewart,
Nay.
Councilmember Treen.
Aye.
Okay, it's a 5-2 vote. Thank you.
Mayor, members of council, item pulled from the consent calendar, item number 2 is a separate contract with Eglick and Whited that I had brought to the council specifically to substitute for the Madrona law firm when we decided to pursue the Jaron matter with Eglick and Whited. This contract in background, contract number C2020-142 with Eglick and Whited was executed in April of 2020 and is also set to expire on December 31st, 2020. And whereas the current expenditures are just over $53,000, not including any November billings, because we still await the outcome of the responses from the Jaron Party and the Growth Management Hearing Board on the current status of our compliance. As well, any future filings against the findings and or actions the city might face upon the city's completion of the EIS and addressing traffic management processes such as V over C modeling formula. The supplemental agreement included an Exhibit 1 that was provided in here, and it was also to continue the contract to the end of 2021. It also expired in December 31st, 2020. It had been drafted up to add an additional $100,000 as the original contract was drafted for $100,000, not knowing what the litigation expansion could have been under that. But I would recommend, I was going to go back in and change it once I overlooked that, couldn't figure out how to get back into the program, and then forgot to address it yesterday, so I sent an email out today recommending to the council that we extend the contract, but we do not expand it from its original $100,000. There's plenty of headroom in here with the current billing. As I said, currently we've only spent $53,000 on the Jaron matter. We don't know where it's going to go. There's some responses that need to be drafted up by the 10th of December, and then the Growth Management Hearing Board hearing on the 17th of December, and it will carry it into January. So I don't recommend that we add any other money to this contract at this time. If we need it down the road, we can address it and bring it back to the council. So sorry for that oversight, but the adjusted contract that I'm recommending is to terminate at the end of 2021 and continue to use the balance in here for the next set of billings that we may or may not yet incur.
Okay,
Thank you.
excellent. Okay, Councilmember Stewart, did you have, that is a really cute dog. Did you have any other questions?
No, I think that we just need to not approve the additional funding on this. So I'll go ahead and make a motion that we modify the contract to extend December 31, 2021 instead of 2020, but that we do not add any additional funds to the contract.
Okay, so it's as recommended. Okay, perfect.
Well, it's not as written, though.
Yeah, it's not. Correct.
Correct. As now recommended, to keep it at the current billing amount and do not add $100,000. Thank you.
Okay. And that is correct. That is what you intended, correct, Councilmember?
So my motion is that we modify the contract to change the end date to December 31, 2021, but we add no additional funding.
I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. Okay. All right, do we have a second to that?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Councilmember Trine. Okay, any discussion? Okay. Do you want to roll call, please?
Mayor Moran,
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Malchow,
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin,
Aye.
Councilmember Ritchie,
No.
Councilmember Ross,
Aye.
Councilmember Stewart,
Aye.
Councilmember Trine.
Aye.
Okay, that's a 6-1 vote. Thank you. Okay, next up this evening is our public hearing. We have a public hearing this evening, our first reading resolution setting the 2021 docket related to site-specific land use map, comprehensive plan, and development regulation amendments, R 2020-897. And I believe this is going to be presented by, I would assume that would be David Pyle, but I don't like to make assumptions. So.
Mayor Moran, David Pyle here. Good evening. Tonight to present the 2021 docket request to you, we have Miriam Leitner, our planning manager, and Evan Fisher, our senior management analyst. I'll pass it off to Evan and Miriam.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Madam Mayor and City Council. Good evening. Tonight, we will be continuing the 2021 docketing process. In tonight's meeting, we're going to quickly review the docketing timeline and process, the docket request we received, and go over the staff recommendations for each of the proposals within the docket request. Afterwards, you'll have the public hearing, deliberate, and decide which docket request proposals should be added to the 2021 docket. First, we'll look at the docket review timeline. Tonight, the City Council will hold a public hearing and consider a resolution to set the docket. Any docketed items will be considered in 2021 during legislative review of the individual proposals. Next, we'll quickly look at the process. The annual docket determines the list of items that will go through review by the Planning Commission and City Council as possible amendments to the comprehensive plan or development regulations. As you'll remember from the joint meeting earlier this year's request is a text amendment to the development regulations. On screen, you'll see where we are in the text amendment process. Any items the City Council choose to docket tonight will go through a full legislative review process next year. Any items that are adopted by City Council at the end of that review would be included in a consolidated ordinance to update the comprehensive plan or development regulations. As we move on to reviewing the docket request, I want to remind you of the docket decision criteria as spelled out in Title 24A. These criteria are how staff evaluated each proposal and shaped our recommendations, which I will be providing in a few minutes. These criteria are: how do the docket requests align with staff work plan items? Is there budget to complete the work? Is there staff availability to complete a full review of the requests? And are the proposals consistent with current staff policies and priorities? Additionally, staff analyzed the level of effort to implement each proposal and assigned a low level of effort or a high level of effort to each. Please refer to Exhibit 3 in your agenda packet for staff's full analysis. Now we move on to reviewing this year's docket request. The request was submitted by 2 citizens and proposes amendments to the Sammamish Municipal Code development regulations. This request included many different text amendments, so to streamline review, we've organized the proposed amendments into overarching themes you see on screen. I will be going over each theme and the proposals within in more detail in the next slides. It is important to remember that the City Council has the option to docket the entire request or individual proposals as they see fit. Think of the docket request as a menu. You can either order the whole menu or go a la carte and choose items as you wish. As we move through the proposals, you'll notice there's a trend in the staff recommendations. We support several of the proposals as they align with city policies and priorities, but feel it's best to wait for the environmentally critical areas update in 2024 to fully review these items. The critical areas update is a state-mandated process defined by the RCW and is a comprehensive review of all of the city's critical area rules. During this time, the city is required to complete thorough review checklists, meet timelines, and has access to grant funding to complete the work. Other jurisdictions will also be completing their reviews simultaneously, so there is an opportunity for coordination and sharing of best practices between cities. Additionally, the work is based on the most current, best available science provided during the update by the Department of Commerce and Department of Ecology, which is used to guide analysis of the city's critical area rules and how they interplay with each other and other sections of the SMC. Lastly, the update involves an extensive public engagement process, with the last update having upwards of 25 meetings. Staff's concern with docketing proposals before the critical areas update is it creates a piecemeal approach to updating these regulations. It could mean missing out on the best available science provided by agencies like the Department of Ecology and understanding the comprehensive impacts of these regulation changes. Now to the first set of 4 proposals that relate to environmentally critical areas. On screen, you see the first proposal, which wants to apply the native growth protection easement as currently done for subdivisions to single-family residents on existing lots for wetlands, wetland boundaries, and tree retention areas. It also includes permanent limits on disturbance of or additions to impervious surfaces in steep slopes and or geological hazard areas without the requirement of additional permitting and review. Staff support applying native growth protection easements to single-family residencies which are developing on sites with existing critical areas, but recommend this change be considered during the critical areas update in 2024 when there is work plan alignment and available budget and staff. Staff do not recommend the creation of a native growth protection easement in tree protection areas for single-family sites as it would limit private use of usable areas. And lastly, staff suggests setting a limit on impervious surface additions without permit, but again, believe this should be done with the critical areas update. Planning Commission chose to recommend this proposal to the City Council because implementing these changes would be easier than implementing other docket proposals. But because this item is not included in the 2021 budget and there is not existing staff capacity to take on additional projects in 2021, staff believe this should wait for the 2024 critical areas update. The second proposal for critical areas suggests maintenance and inspection requirements and operation manuals for storm drainage systems be recorded on title consistent with requirements placed on subdivisions. Initially, community development thought this was something that needed to be docketed, but upon further review with Public Works, it became clear this is already a policy that is administered by Public Works. The third proposal of the request places permanent limits on the original permits regarding tree retention and limits on development in critical areas and have them recorded on title as is the case with new plats and subdivisions. Planning Commission also chose to recommend this proposal as again, it is easier to implement than other docket request proposals. Staff support making this change, but believe it should be considered during the critical areas update in 2024 as currently there is no budget, staff availability, or work plan alignment for this change. The last proposal for critical areas is an amendment to establish a clear parameter around what is considered reasonable by assignment of a minimum square footage footprint entitlement per zone. Again, staff support this change, but believe it should be considered during the critical areas update. The next 3 proposals are code corrections and clarifications. 2A proposes changes that would expand critical area tract protections to landslide hazard areas less than 1 acre in size and add all erosion hazard areas and buffers. Staff support 2A, but again, believe it should be done during the critical areas update. 2B wants to add a definition of native growth protection easements, as native growth protection easements have existed prior to incorporation and still exist within the city, and the applicants believe they should be defined within the SMC. Staff do not support 2B based on the intricacies of how these terms are defined by King County and the state. 2C is asking to add a definition for sensitive areas in section 21A.15.1065. This action cannot be done as this section of code has been repealed, and a repealed section may not be amended. The last set of docket request proposals are text amendments to steep slopes. 3A wants to increase buffer protections to steep slopes, and 3B increases tree retention percentages in erosion hazard areas. Staff support 3A, but again, feel it should wait until there is staff availability, budget, and work plan alignment during the critical areas update. Staff do not support 3B as tree retention exceeding 50% may be seen as a taking of private property. Staff reviewed this with legal, who noted the legal risk of takings claims is inversely proportional to the amount of buildable area left after the application of the tree retention percentages. In other words, as buildable area decreases, risk of taking claims increases. For this reason, staff do not support this proposal. To summarize, at this time, staff do not recommend docketing any proposed items within this year's docket request. When analyzing the proposals against Title 24A's decision criteria, staff felt there was currently not sufficient work plan alignment, staff availability to complete the work, nor allocated budget to fund the work. As a number of these proposals are consistent with city policies and programs, staff does want to emphasize that the 2024 critical areas update will provide an opportunity for much of these items to be thoroughly reviewed. With that, we are happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, first up we have got Deputy Mayor, followed by Councilmember Train.
Thanks. I do have a question based on staff recommendation. Perfect timing for my dog to start barking in the background, sorry. On 3B, you stated that staff doesn't support it because anything over 50% might be considered a taking. So my first question is, are all erosion hazard areas R1? Because it is the R1 zone that has a 50% tree retention. Anything below that, if there are any areas of a city that are in the erosion hazard area that are R4, the tree retention is 35%, not 50. So we could potentially then bump it up to 50, correct?
So this is David Pyle. I'm going to jump in here. I'm actually accessing the code right now. My understanding is your question is whether or not the tree retention requirements for the R4 zone that are in the erosion hazard area is 50% or 35%. Is that correct?
So my question is, what was stated in the presentation was that increasing the tree retention in erosion hazard areas would be a taking over 50%. My first question, it's kind of two-part question. Question one is every square inch of this city that's in the erosion hazard area R1, or is everything in the erosion hazard area, because the R1 is 50% tree retention. R4 is 35%, everything below it, unless we're talking about the town center, which is totally different. So unless in code for tree retention, the erosion hazard area has a 50% tree retention requirement.
So all areas in the erosion hazard area require 50% tree retention in accordance with 21A 37-250, item 1A.
Okay. That answers my question then.
Okay.
And then my second question is relative to adoption of any of these changes outside of the 2024 critical areas. So I understand that the problem is twofold. One is having staff and work plan bandwidth to be able to tackle these items. And then the second side of this is trying to ascertain if we decided to docket some of these. Now, docketing them isn't the same as adopting them. We're docketing them for 2021. But if we decided to pursue these, could we not revisit them? I'm assuming we can simply just revisit them in 2024 should we adopt them. And how heavy is the lift for staff on some of these items? Because it sounds like there's a bandwidth issue. Is that correct?
Yeah, so from my perspective, critical areas ordinances and the public process that goes along with them, it's really important that it happens concurrently with the state mandated timeline because, first of all, there's a grant that they give us. Typically, hopefully that will continue. You never know these days. Secondly, there's typically some technical support that's given in the form of best available science documentation. And usually when we see this scheduled update approach, the state starts to reach out to all the cities and counties and works collaboratively with them to develop best available science to support the efforts. With the idea that cities can have some deviations on these, however, like Sammamish is unique in its own ways. However, the foundational science behind it is somewhat uniform, so that it's consistent across jurisdictions, so that a developer or a property owner or the state who has to oversee this and can understand what each city is doing and the foundation behind it. So that said, I'm always a little nervous about opening up the critical areas ordinance because if you look at the record around the last time when the city opened up its critical areas ordinance, I think there were something, and I'm pulling this number out of the air and possibly exaggerating a little, around 32 meetings related to critical areas. I could go find the exact number, but it was a very high number. The city was sued as a result of it. There's a lot of energy, both positive and negative, around this topic. And we would prefer to contain it to its intended timeline that the state mandates it. There are some things we could do that if we're able to contain them and not allow for scope creep to occur, could be surgical and could occur pretty quickly. But I'm always wary of those because, the theory of a policy window is be careful what window you open because all sorts of stuff gets thrown through that window. So just want to make sure that we're aware of that. That's really the basis behind our hesitancy to want to take on some of these, is that the staff burden can grow very quickly on these. Not only that, but we would probably need to bring in a consultant to support us on some of the geotechnical components. So if it's related to a geotechnical issue, we would probably need consultant support on that, and we can't do that in-house.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the color behind the delicacies behind opening up the critical areas stuff, and sounds like it potentially is a can of worms, and we know we're going to be opening it up in 2024. So I appreciate that color. Thank you.
Councilmember Treen?
Yeah, I guess it's for David Pyle since you were just talking about it. So I'm on the same issue with Deputy Mayor Mouchow on the increased tree retention percentage. The comment made by Evan was that 50% tree retention exceeding 50% may be seen as a taking of private property. So is that a law? I mean, could it be 55%? Could it be 60%? And not considered a taking?
Those are all valid comments. We're one of the things we're seeing in development in the city and in site planning in the city is that the higher the tree retention rate, the more complex it is to site a home or a commercial building, or depending on whatever the zoning is for the project on the site, even a school, if you will. The most recent school we have under construction was extremely complicated for the school district to find a way to protect the required number of trees, and we had 4 or 5 back and forths with them on that through revisions and corrections. And that was in part of the erosion hazard area, part of it's out of the erosion hazard area, so the retention rates are different. So the higher it gets, the more difficult it is to site a project. Understanding that trees are extremely valuable, it's a balancing act for us. So if you were to direct us to take this one up, this is one that would open up 21A37 as opposed to 21A50. It's not a critical areas issue per se. It could be done in the tree retention ordinance.
Thank you, Dave. That's my next question. If this wasn't just in the erosion hazardous area, could we take this one up as something that we want to look at citywide?
Yes, if you wanted to look at amending the tree retention ordinance and just adjusting some of the numbers with regard to percentages of retention, that's something that could be taken up. It is pretty close to 3B, so that is, that would be a friendly council amendment that could be made to the proposal, from what I understand.
And will we do that now, or would we do that when it comes back on the flow chart at the end? Because this goes back to the commission, we could ask them, hey, why don't you look at this 3D, take it citywide, let's look at those numbers, do some work on it, massage it, and bring it back to us?
Yeah, you could provide that direction now. That would probably be best. I mean, my understanding, and I'm basing this off of a read of 24A.10.010.3G. The City Council can amend docket requests at your discretion. However, it's really, as long as the proposed council amendments to the docket requests are reasonably proximate to the topical content of the docket item. So long as it's pretty close to it, you can amend it and propose it that way, as far as I understand it. However, this one is one that would definitely increase, some of the outreach we have to do. It would increase some of the complexities in permitting, but we would evaluate that down the line if we were to take this one up.
Then my follow-up question is does it align with our work plan? Is it covered in our budget? Do we have the steps? So am I looking at a bunch of X marks, if we amend it and made it so that it was citywide?
So
still looking at the same problem as far as staffing and.
Yes. So if we were to do this, if we were to take this up in the manner that you suggest, I would provide a counter suggestion that it would be done as part of the urban forest management plan implementation, and that would be the appropriate place to do that. But absent that, and absent an urban forest management plan implementation strategy that identifies this as one of the things that we would want to do in implementing that urban forest plan, I would not suggest taking it up because it's unclear how it aligns with that plan at this point in time.
Thank you, David. Mayor, I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, thank you, David. Certainly appreciate the staff input on this. My concern about waiting in 2024 is that's a long way away. And I know that, in particular, Mary Wichter has been proposing some of these for a long time now. So it's not like they're new problems and we're just going to wait a couple of years. These are problems that have been there for a really long time, and Mary's been doing a lot of heavy lifting and providing this information to us. So you made a comment that for some of these, if we were to, again, reiterating what the deputy mayor said, docketing these, putting these on the docket doesn't mean we're going to implement anything. It means that the staff will take a look and do some work on them next year and bring back some recommendations. You made a comment that we could potentially try to be very surgical about some of these. And I think we should consider that, at least for a couple of these. I'm particularly interested in like 1A. If we go back to 1A, which is apply the native growth protection easement. Since this is something that I'm wondering if we could be fairly surgical in this and possibly take a look at it from that perspective. Because again, I think, again, reiterating what the deputy mayor says, is there's nothing preventing us from reassessing these in 2024 when we have all of the best available science documentation.
Just want to check and see if I'm frozen or if Pam froze on us.
No, I think Pam froze.
Yeah.
I never know if I'm frozen or if it's something else, so I just want to check. Thank you.
Okay, let me see if there's somebody else until she rejoins. Is there anybody else who has any other questions on this? Okay, Deputy Mayor, and then I have a comment.
Yeah, I think, I'm waffling a little bit on some of these because I think, there's desire to implement it, and I appreciate staff, saying that, they support the recommendation, which is part of why I asked the question about bandwidth for staff too, because, council just made some strategic cuts last week, and I want to be sure, even if we just say, yes, we're going to consider this. This doesn't mean we're doing it. Docketing it here means we're going to tackle it in 2021. So we are sending staff off to go do some work. And I appreciate the idea of some of these surgical things. I just want, based on what David Pyle just told us, I want to be sure that we truly can be as non-invasive as possible when we're playing surgeon here, because if we go in for the non-invasive, but then we have to open up the whole critical areas, we just kind of, we're self-defeating. And I guess I'm looking for David to kind of comment on, the path forward with truly being surgical with some of these to be able to get in and get out, or whether we're truly opening up a can of worms here and then derailing our own work plan for what 2021 has in store for us because we decided to do what we thought was this little thing that turned into a really big thing.
So my comment on, and I can walk through these and provide some feedback. We already are at a point where we're having some capacity issues and staffing issues currently with the staffing that we have, and there's a lot going on in the city right now. We're trying to take on a lot, and we're definitely supportive of the council's direction here and wanting to tighten up our rules, make sure that the living environment is something that is appropriate for the entire community, and that everyone is supportive of what the city is doing. And we're working really hard at that, and our staff are spending long days and night meetings and getting up early and starting work bright and early again the next morning, just like you all do in your day-to-day lives. So I'm happy to walk through these and provide some candid feedback about whether or not we could take them on, and what it would mean to take them on. We did this with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, as a result of that, ended up recommending 2 of them to you. And there's a reason why they recommended those 2, because I think they felt like it was something that was in the range of reasonableness for the staff to take on as a result of our comments to them. So happy to provide that same overview to you if you'd like, or happy to, if you want to pull any specific one of them out, I can respond to it. I'm pretty familiar with our code and have spent years prior to coming to Sammamish reviewing critical areas reports and permitting, so have been around the block a few times on these and understand some of the nuances with development and how these rules interplay with development.
So David, maybe to save time, my suggestion would be, why don't you just walk us through the ones that the Planning Commission said yes to?
Yep. So Evan, can you remind me which ones those were? I believe it was 1A.
1A.
Correct. It's 1A and 1C, David.
And
okay,
I think we have Councilmember Stewart on here, because can we find out from her which ones she had questions on? And let's see if we can't lop all those on the same. Councilmember Stewart, are you on?
I am. Thank you. Sorry about that. Our internet kicked us all off for a moment there. Actually, 1A and 1C are my top 2. So I had 2 others as well, 2A and 3A.
Okay.
But if we could start out with 1A and 1C, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so 1A really is, I actually support 1A. Apply to native growth protection easement as currently done for subdivisions to single-family residences on existing lots for wetlands and wetland boundaries as well as tree retention areas. So the idea here is that when you develop on a subdivision and there's a wetland on the site, you're required to set the wetland and wetland buffer into a tract. But if you have a vacant single-family lot and you develop that vacant single-family lot, there is no requirement that you create a native growth easement area to protect that area. Other cities have this requirement. It's fairly standard. So I don't see a big objection here. The idea here is that once you develop a lot and you negotiate a buffer, say you do buffer averaging or buffer reduction, that then is set in stone on the property and you can't nibble away at it over time. And it's something that is marked on a easement that's recorded on the title of the property. So if you were to sell the property at a later date, then the subsequent buyer would be aware of that encumbrance on the property. It's valuable for enforcement because the new owner can't claim innocent purchaser. It was in their title report. It's clear as day that it was there. It's helpful for us to actually have these things recorded at the point of development as well. So this is a pretty easy fix in the code, although getting it ramped up to the Planning Commission, bringing it to hearing, getting recommendation from the Planning Commission, bringing it to the council, bringing it to council hearing is quite a bit of staff time, just that simple process. So if we were to take this one on, we would want to bundle any other ones with this to make sure we're not duplicating the process and consuming staff time in that manner. The other thing you might want to consider is directing that it also include steep slope critical areas and steep slope buffers and top of slope buffers and toe of slope buffers, and that those also be set aside in easement, not just wetlands and wetland buffers and streams and stream buffers. So that's something I think that could be done pretty easily. With regard to permanent limits on disturbance of or additions to impervious surface and steep slopes and geologic hazard areas, one of the issues here is that we have limitations on the amount of impervious you're allowed to have, but if you don't trigger a permit, we never know, you're not ever subject to permit review. So what we would be doing here is setting permanent limits on a site that would be recorded through that easement. And if somebody wanted to modify that, they would have to come in and get a permit and go through permit review to do that. The idea here is that you can't just slowly take a site, say you had a lot that had 2,000 square feet of impervious on it. You can't just every weekend add 100 square feet of concrete to that site, which we do see happen. And each time you take that action, it's under the threshold that requires a permit. You're never caught. You're never called out for it. Make sure that when a site comes in for development, that there is a limit on the amount of disturbance or impervious that can be placed on a site in a sensitive area. So we support this one as well. It makes it more transparent. It makes it easier for us to track what can happen on a property, and it also makes it something that passes on down the line to subsequent property owners when they buy the lot. They can't argue they didn't know about it. It's shown on the title, the title report as an encumbrance. We could go to, was it 1C, Evan?
I think that's what you just talked about, wasn't it?
1B, excuse me, 1A and 1C. The second part of 1A is similar to 1C. And this is due to the way in which we received the proposals. We had to work with the applicant who made the proposal, and we clarified them over time. We probably could collapse the second part of 1A into 1C. They're pretty similar. This one is place permanent limits on the original permits regarding tree retention and limits on development in critical areas, and have them recorded as is the case with new plats and subdivisions. So the issue here is when, just like with wetlands and streams and buffers, when you have a tree that is required to be retained when you're building a new single-family home on a vacant existing single-family lot, there is no requirement that there be an easement placed around the tree protection area of that tree. However, in a subdivision, all of the required trees are required to have tree protection areas and tree protection easements placed around them that are recorded on the face of the plat. The issue here is that there's no evidence that those trees were required to be retained to a subsequent property owner. So what we would be doing here is simply placing an easement, a tree protection easement around the drip line of the protected tree like you have to do in a subdivision. We support this one as well. It makes it clear which trees are required to be retained. It's just, again, a matter of ramping up staff to get this to Planning Commission, dealing with the Planning Commission work session, taking it to public hearing, getting a recommendation, bringing it to council, doing a council work session, getting through council public hearing, and then implementing it. So there's quite a bit of staff work time that goes into that. Just wanted to make sure we're clear about that. What was the other one you were interested in?
2A and 3A, if you could just really quickly go over those.
2A, change and delete that are 1 acre or greater in size and consider adding in all erosion hazard areas and buffers. The issue here is that there's this artificial limit on I think it's erosion hazard areas that are 1 acre or greater in size. So if you're subdividing a property, and it's 21A 5190, one sec, I'm going to jump to that in the code. Apologize, just bear with me. Almost there.
I can read it. I have it in front of me if you need it.
It's 21A 5190, right?
190.
191. Yes, it says
number 1, and then the 1 acre is A.
Got it. A. Okay. Critical area tracts shall be used to delineate and protect those critical areas and buffers listed below in development proposals for subdivisions, short subdivisions, or binding site plans, and shall be recorded on all documents of title of record for all affected lots. And then the first one is all landslide hazard areas and buffers that are 1 acre or greater. Acre in size. However, what that means is that if you have a landslide hazard area and buffer that is a half an acre in size, 3/4 of an acre in size, which is pretty large, that you wouldn't have to go through the recording process or setting it aside in a tract, and you could actually develop.
Right.
That would be considered as developable area.
Yeah. Okay. And is this something you think could be fairly surgical? I mean, I know that all of these require staff time, and I'm cognizant of that, but is this something you think we could do in a fairly surgical manner?
Well, what you could do there is you could simply change that to say you could have a size threshold, a meaningful size. You'd have to come up with what a meaningful size would be. The issue to consider here is that that under the density calculation for a subdivision, so in, let's see, it's 21A, density and dimensions, 21A 25, calculations, site area used for density calculations. So 21A.25.080, calculations, site area used for density calculations. And it goes on to say, item 2, existing submerged lands, steep slopes and buffers, which are in landslide hazard areas. So those are landslide hazard areas. Categories 1 to 4 wetlands and buffers, et cetera, shall not be credited towards base and maximum density. So what ends up happening is that you end up taking those areas out of the density calculation anyway. So I don't see that as being too big of an implication on the developability of a property. And there is no 1 acre of size or greater listed here. It simply says existing submerged lands, steep slopes and buffers. It doesn't say what size steep slopes and buffers. And what would end up happening is you would be requiring, if you were to change this, you would require that the developer set aside landslide hazard areas that include steep slopes and buffers into a tract. on the project. Instead of currently, there is no requirement if they're smaller than an acre to be set aside. So the idea here is that you probably don't want developers setting aside a 500 square foot tract if there's a slope that's that size. You probably want something meaningful, like around 2,000 square feet would be the minimum you might want to go to. Just wanting to bring that up, just because these oddball tracts are a burden on a homeowners association. So requiring the tract to be created that is not of a meaningful size typically ends up being more of a burden in the long run than a value.
Sure. So may I ask a question, Madam Mayor?
Absolutely.
Thanks. So David, I think what I hear you saying is that the 1 acre or greater is probably way too big. We probably don't want it to be on any size. We need to have some minimum size, but you agree that the way it's written now, it kind of allows potential development on areas that we really don't want to have happen, and that in these sort of critical areas and erosion and landslide hazard areas, it's not just a matter of limiting the development. There are safety implications and there are serious environmental implications downhill and downstream. Is that accurate?
So that, I would disagree with one part of that, and that is that we're not currently allowing development to happen in those areas because there's another partner section in 21A50 that prohibits development in landslide hazard areas. What it's not achieving is setting aside that area for future protection. So we might experience someone trying to develop that at a later point in time. I've seen this happen where a subdivision is created and they set aside. We do pretty well. I won't say we do really well. We do pretty well with subdivisions and wetlands and streams. It's a known entity. We know how to buffer a stream. We know how to buffer a wetland. But slopes are a little bit of a different topic for us, a little more challenging. So what you might see is that a slope be set aside in development and you can't develop around it. There's a buffer on it. It's shown on the site plan for the development. They build a house near it, but not in the buffer and not on the slope. The lot then is created and it has, part of the slope on it. And then the subsequent property owner 5 years down the line wants to build a gazebo on the slope, but it's not protected on the face of the plat like a wetland or a stream would be. And then they come in for permit and we look at it and we say, well, we think there's a plat. So you can see the back and forth that we have. What this would do is it would clarify it. Other cities do require this, that if you have a landslide hazard area or a steep slope area that qualifies as a landslide hazard area of a certain meaningful size, that you end up putting it into a tract for permanent protection as part of a subdivision. That's what I think they're asking for.
Okay. And you said this is fairly common in other cities.
It does happen in other cities. It's considered as a critical area, and in other cities, whenever you have a critical area, you're required to put it. And there are some parameters. So certain critical areas, that are not meaningful in size, are not required to be put into a tract. Which is what I'm getting at, is you have to come up with a threshold of what is meaningful.
Okay, thank you.
And there was one more.
It was 3A, David.
3A. There we go.
3A. Add a buffer or other protection to steep slopes from sides and or adjacent areas. So my understanding is the reason why slopes are buffered at the top and the top and the toe here in Sammamish, and they are likewise in other cities, and not to the sides, is because of the best available science documents that were prepared with the critical areas updates that indicated that you're really only concerned about the work that is happening directly above a slope or the work that's happening directly below a slope. The work that happens on the peripheral of a slope, where the slope might flatten considered a landslide hazard area is really what I recall to be less consequential to the stability of that slope. And for that reason, the recommendations from the geotechnical engineers was that you protect the top and the toe. They were not really as concerned around the sides or the peripheral of the slope. So this one we think would be much more work because we have to bring in a geotech that would then have to help us analyze this and whether or not there's any reason to buffer the sides of a slope, et cetera. I do know because I worked quite a bit on slopes in Bellevue that they have the same set of rules that we do. They don't require buffering to the side of the slope.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, I'm trying to see if we have any more questions here. And I'm not seeing any.
I'd like to make a motion if there are no more
Well,
questions.
we've opened up the hearing, we've listened to the presentation. We do have a person on, we do have a caller. Please, yes.
Okay, I will unmute Ms. Wichter, who had requested to speak on the public hearing. Ms. Wichter, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name's Mary Wichter. I lived in Sammamish for 20 years. I also did this joint docket application with Mark Cross. So if you adopt, I'd like his name added instead of Mary Johnson, who we did take inputs with, but I did joint dockets with her the prior year. Also, I do want to thank all the staff for all their work, effort, and communications. They've taken a lot of our inputs, put them in Development Regulations Phase 2, and then some of these docket items. And then I know staff has a lot to do in budget, but I think it is worthwhile bundling the ones that are surgically able to be due that focus on the most serious things that are happening. Sammamish had problems with 1A and 1C since the tree retention ordinance, but 1A since about 2010 to 2013. So waiting to 2024 just really is not acceptable. And when David had spoken at the Planning Commission and tonight, there really are ways that you can do 1A and 1C. 1A would do things so that if somebody buys a property, they know what's there and they know what they have to maintain and they know what they have to protect. It could be done not as separate tracts on an individual thing, but as an easement area. And 1C combines with that because tree regulations are in 21A.37, not 21A50. So they're not critical areas, but the problem is if you're supposed to retain trees, but you never record anything on these individual lots, the next people don't even know what the trees are, and the trees will just end up disappearing. And we've seen that happen quite a bit in the city. So Mark Cross and I had put those in and really want to see those done. And David said you could also put in the steep slope buffers if you wanted to bundle that with like 1A with the wetland buffers. And the reason that the top and the toe of the slopes are very important, and those are in our code, the sides of the slope are important because we have 3,500 septics in the city. And when you have a septic field and it's going, sometimes you'll end up with water emanating from the sides of the slope. So it's really important to look at those. And I believe the development regulations have some things on septic, so maybe you wouldn't have to do the side slopes for steep slopes if you do the septic portion right in the development regulations. 1B, which is not considered, is supposed to be done. I hope that not only are what you do for low impact developments, but also anything you do for any type of drainage would be recorded, because a lot of times the people buy a home, they don't know what's underground, they don't know what needs to get maintained, and that does cause problems. For 2A that Pam had asked about, let me find it here. The 1 acre or greater in size, that was actually deleted for erosion hazard areas and the size a while back, and the 1 acre stays in landslide hazard areas. And maybe that could be coupled with the buffers in 1A. But it is important because a 1 acre is a really huge size, and landslides aren't supposed to allow development, but they do happen, and steep slopes are regulated as landslide hazard areas, so that one might be worth looking at and bundling together. 2B and 2C are just definitions that need to be added. and we can live without those, or they can do them in the development reg update or the UDC. And then on the increase of tree retention percentage,
Okay,
I know I'm over time, but I want to address.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up.
With the tree percentage area is 50% for erosion hazard areas. Many of them are in R4 areas. And we did learn through David that for a landslide, it's supposed to be 100% tree retention, but through RUEs and other things, you end up losing a lot of those trees. So it's super important to do 1A, 1C, which are the most important, and then bundle them with anything else you're interested in. And if you could get that updated for the resolution, I hope that council will consider passing it tonight. Thanks.
Okay, going back into the queue. Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we docket items 1A, 1C, and 2A with a couple of modifications for 1A. I believe Mr. Pyle said we could consider looking at steep slopes and some other steep and slopey things, but I didn't get them all down. So I would like to add the other items that if we're going to open that up and look at that while we stay surgical, and I don't want too much scope creep, it did sound like there were some other critical or steep slope areas that we should look at with 1A. And to bundle 1A and 1C together makes sense. And it sounds like for 2A, we would want to make the one modification that, as opposed to just deleting that are 1 acre or greater in size, and make sure that we had some definition for some meaningful size, or that we're meaningful in size, and define what that is. So again, my motion would be to docket 1A, 1C, and 2A with some minor modifications.
Okay, I need a second.
Councilmember Stewart, can you repeat that one more time, please?
Yeah, so I'm recommending that we docket items 1A, 1C, and 2A. 1A and 1C could actually be bundled potentially together as one item.
Yeah.
Oh, and 2A would have the modification that we would have to add meaningful in size and define what meaningful meant there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second. Now discussion. Deputy Mayor?
Thanks. I think, generally I'm supportive. However, I have some concerns on 2A, and I think that could potentially be a rabbit hole that we may want to avoid for staff. I'm certainly in favor of it, but I think considering the workload and what we put on staff, my concern with trying to define this meaningful, area to which a tract could be set aside. I fear that starts cracking open the box of worms, and it becomes much larger than we intended. So, I think I need. I hate to keep calling on David Pyle here, but his advice or his forethought on what could happen here. I mean, if we start bouncing around ideas between 10,000 square feet, half an acre, I mean, I'm certainly supportive of this. Like, I think 1 acre is certainly too much. But I think we have to be cognizant of everything that our staff is working on right now that this council has asked them to do. And I just, while it seems really easy while we sit here, we'll just put 10,000 square feet and call it good. The amount of public comment that comes forward with that starts to open up that rabbit hole, I fear, and that's what I'm looking for David to kind of comment on, I guess.
In past experiences, we had a threshold by which we regulated steep slopes. So we had a minimum area that was considered as meaningful for regulation of steep slope. We don't have that here. So, if I think it was 2,000 square feet, 10 feet of rise, and 40% slope was something that was regulated, and that was something that was large enough to put into a tract. That was in a different city, and so that's where I get 1,000 square feet from. Is that you start to get down to a size that is something that really is more of a nuisance to a homeowners association than a benefit to something that you're getting out of it. We already have a hard enough problem dealing with homeowners associations and maintenance of their tracts, their critical areas tracts and their open space tracts, where we have blackberry invasions and colonization with invasives, et cetera, and requiring that more area be set aside does not always meet the objective. So I'm with you. I don't know what the right amount of area is. I would suggest you would I guess I'm trying to think of a better way to frame this, but I'm lost for terms right now. So 2,000 is what I know, and that's sort of why I stand with it.
You got a little.
Well, I mean, I'm not so hung up on the whatever we define the spaces tonight. I'm more concerned about if we add this, what does this do for staff workload, and is this the potential item that we add to the docket that kind of breaks the bank and kind of cracks open everything else? Or is this something that can be done fairly surgically, as we've discussed on some of these other ones? I mean, the more we add in here, I think the more likely we are to break the bank here, and then the floodgates open. So I'm just trying to be cognizant of staff workload as it pertains to these.
This one is likely to receive the most pushback, and the reason for that is anytime you start to require that a developer sets aside property in a tract, that's different than a single-family homeowner setting up an easement on their property because they still own the property, right? There's restriction on what they can use it for. Sure. But anytime you require a developer set aside property for a different purpose in a tract that they can't sell, and that diminishes the lot sizes of the lots that they could create in that division, is when you see pushback. And I think that the one case that I might bring up is the Osgood case that any of you might be familiar with. It's the Silverleaf. I think it's a Silverleaf subdivision that you recently saw for final subdivision. That was the case where the property owner objected to the critical areas restrictions in the erosion hazard area and their sensitive water body, and ended up filing suit against the city. So that's an example of where you want to be careful not to go too far, because we end up in legal challenge. I would suggest that anytime you take land that would otherwise be something that they could apply to a lot for a lot size, and you take that and set it aside into a separate tract, that is a moment where you get attention from builders and developers who are wanting to subdivide.
Okay, I'm going to do a quick round robin.
Correct? The critical areas.
Could you repeat that, please?
Sorry, I was trying to go back through what I heard staff saying, that they don't support this, but this could be done under the critical areas overhaul that we do in 2024, correct?
Yes. As it's shaping up right now, the critical areas overhaul for Sammamish is likely going to be primarily related to geosciences, the geohazards, and that's mostly in response to how we deal with surface flow, water across erosive soils, how we deal with these layers that Mary Johnson very correctly shows. When you stack up the layers, what happens? There's a bit of a challenge in the way our code is set up right now with the geosciences, and we really want to clean that up, and we're looking forward to doing that with the critical areas update that's coming in 23 and 24.
Thank you.
Okay, Council, I'm going to do a quick round robin on this. If you have no comment, just say pass. Councilmember Gamblin?
Pass, I'm good, thank you.
Councilmember Ritchie?
Pass.
Councilmember Ross?
I have a couple questions. As I'm hearing the discussion on this docket, most are in agreement that most of these are worthy improvements to our comp plan. However, the real discussion is on timing. And what really comes to mind is balancing the risk of waiting till 2024, and maybe Dave, you can help assess that risk of harmful development that working these early as some of these low-hanging fruits is.
We can't hear you, Mr.
We
Ross.
lost you.
Oh, that was swell.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. No one was yelling at me or blinking. Okay. My main concern is what we've been talking about is there's not a lot of disagreement on the content per se on several of these. It really comes down to when do we do it? Do we put it in the docket now? If we put it in the docket now, we mentioned 2, possibly 3. Is that more than just a toe in the water, David? Or is because either you prepare for these. You don't. It's not as simple as the council gets it and decides, well, should we implement any changes in our code? It's more than that. It's prep work. It's staff time. It's getting consultants in order. And so I'm concerned if does that, number one, get in the way of us doing other work plan business priorities, and 2, and that's related to, is by waiting on some of these low-hanging fruit items, is there any real risk, some significant risk to bad development that these changes are trying to enhance and then avoid?
Yeah, so the first part is, yes, it does interfere with other work that's on the work plan. And as we talked about, I think last week Thanksgiving already? I can't believe it. Last Wednesday, I guess last Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday, as part of the budget discussion, the more we have on our plate, the more the staff don't have the ability to focus on specific items that are a priority, and the more, I guess, prone we are to missing items and not being able to provide the level of detail and review that we want to on things, so we don't miss something. We're only human. There are definitely times when we miss things. And we really are appreciative of the council for raising things that we miss, that happens. But what we don't want to be is embarrassed in front of you when we haven't had a chance to prepare because we're working on so many items that we can't get to them. And that is our fear here, is that as we stack things on our work plan, and as we also look at a fixed number of staff, that we're not able to make adjustments internally to bring on board more staff, assign resources to keep up with the work. We're taking on a lot right now. Development regs update phase 2 in itself is a huge lift. Really looking forward to working through all those items with you, but it's going to be a big topic that'll be on your agenda in 21. And that's going to take up a huge amount of staff time in itself, in addition to the other items we're working on. So that's the first answer. The second answer is, to part 2 of your question, is that there are some changes here, I think, that are more concerning. And you heard the comment in the public you heard the public testimony as part of the public hearing that there are quite a few lots in the Tamarack neighborhood and many in the Inglewood neighborhood that actually would benefit from some of these changes being made. where we're going to start seeing more pressure for development because those are existing lots, even though they are very difficult to develop. So some of these proposed amendments come from residents that live in those neighborhoods that have concern about future development on those lots. So I would say that we are less likely to see subdivisions occur in those neighborhoods, and more likely to see existing single-family lots that are there that have been around for a long time be somehow put on the market, sold to somebody who doesn't really know what they're getting into, and possibly try and build on them. So the better rules we have in place for those properties, that's really where the value add is here. The subdivisions are mostly occurring, up in the flatter areas, and we do have fairly restrictive rules already in place for those. Where the gaps are that need immediate attention are more likely in the Tamarack and Inglewood neighborhood where those existing lots are.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember Ross?
Well, yes, it did. It sounds like a two-edged sword. For those who want to build on their land, that's one thing. For those who want to sell their land without further restrictions is another. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, I'd see it as.
Okay, Councilmember Stewart, did we have you speak on this one already? I think we did because you made the motion.
I actually didn't get to speak on my motion.
Okay.
I made the motion, but I didn't get to speak on it.
Okay, speak now.
And I do have a question based on what David just said, but what I would say in speaking to this is that I would be curious, in terms of where this might fit into the priorities. I want to highlight, and I think to Councilmember Ross's point, that these areas that we would be addressing, these steep slopes and erosion hazard areas, I think there is a danger, and David, you can confirm this, there is a danger that without tightening up some of these things or plugging some of these loopholes, there is a danger that some bad development can occur. These are areas where we create more stormwater runoff. These are areas where we have potentially more flooding that affects our streams and our fish and the lake. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of prioritizing. So I hear you in terms of staff being very busy, but I would like to see where, this may compare in terms of priority from an environmental standpoint, and also from we got to be careful about, cramming some of these things into these potentially challenging areas. And I know we've heard a lot from our emergency manager around what happens if there are things like earthquakes. I mean, these are also the areas where if you had something like that, these are the places where you want to be the most careful about how you develop, because these are going to be the hardest hit in those types of emergencies. So I appreciate all of those concerns, but I would say that these are environmentally and safety-wise, in my mind, some pretty high priority items. That being said, David, you made a comment around the subdivisions, and you're a little bit less worried about the subdivisions because you feel like maybe we have some code. Was that in reference specifically to 2A here and the tracks, or?
That's in reference to generally where the land that might be available for division is available or is located. We're not seeing land that is available for subdivision as having these areas of large landslide hazard areas. Most of that land area is now located within the erosion hazard near sensitive water bodies no disturbance area. And you can't subdivide in that area anyway. It's prohibited. So that's already addressed through that section of the code. But what that...
Right. I guess I'm not following where you're talking about subdividing versus, because some of these changes aren't specific to subdividing. So I think that's where I'm getting lost.
2A is specific to subdivision.
Right. Okay. So it is. So your comments were really more about 2A and not necessarily about 1A and 1C.
Yeah, 1A and 1C. What I was trying to say, and I guess maybe I didn't say it clear enough, so thank you for the ask for clarification, is 1A and 1C pertains more to existing vacant lots, as I see it. 2A pertains to subdivisions. And 2A is, as I also mentioned, is a little more challenging because that would require setting aside a tract. And anytime you require a developer to set aside a tract, that's a little bit of a higher bar, and they tend to push back on that, as I've seen in rule writing in the past.
Right. One last question, and then I promise to stop. But in regards to 2A, this is one where you've said that you've seen this in other cities, and maybe even commented that you've worked on it in other cities. Given that it exists in other cities, does that help us? I realize that there may still be pushback, but doesn't that help us to say there's already existing code from other cities? We may even be able to leverage some of their definitions in terms of what a meaningful size would be, and would that help us to kind of make it a little bit less work for you guys to have to figure that out, and B, give us some leverage in terms of us pushing back on the pushback that says this isn't some unique code we've come up with. This is code that exists in other cities, and for good reason.
It does. You're right about that. However, it doesn't fit in my mind into the surgical category by any means, because anytime you have a subjective item, which would be the size of the area in this case, you end up in a protracted dialogue or debate about that, and versus the others, which are surgical and are very objective. You want to add a native growth easement protection area for slopes, right? That is a very specific thing you are doing. It's not subjective. It doesn't require identifying an area limit. So that's the difference as I see it, which is why I tend to steer away from 2A. If you were to docket items, I would be more in line of docketing the 1A, and I think was it 1C? I get these confused.
Yeah, 1A and 1C.
Because I feel those are surgical. They fit into the definition of surgical.
Got it. And you said that you don't think we have any land that could be subdivided left in these hazard areas? So that's why 2A is also not important because we don't have any?
I don't think we have a abundance of land in that area that is available for subdivision at this point in time. I think that the land that is vacant, that is in landslide hazard areas or steep slope areas, also happens to be overlaid by the erosion hazard near sensitive water bodies no disturbance area. That doesn't mean that there is not land available in the city that could be proposed for subdivision that has landslide hazards on it, but the majority of the land, as I understand it, that it remains in the city is in the erosion hazard or sensitive water bodies no disturbance area that has landslide hazards associated with it.
Okay, thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Next is Councilmember Treen.
So I think my question's for Lisa, because it's a legal question on 1A. Lisa, and maybe Dave knows this too, but applying the native growth protection easements that is currently done for subdivisions to single-family residents on existing lots. Wow. So I'm going to take the same laws. Is it legal for us? Here's my question. Is it legal for the council to actually approve, or would we be able to pass this as a law or an ordinance and require single family residents to meet a subdivision standard?
Yeah, I'm going to probably have to have David help me with this question. And generally, the legal answer is, as was stated at the beginning of this presentation, is the less buildable land available to a property owner, the more likely it is the city is going to receive a challenge. There isn't really a bright line, but it's a flag. There are lots, however, in the city that don't have any buildable land because they're completely encumbered by landslide hazard, critical areas, setbacks, and other things. And in addition to this inverse relationship that was articulated at the beginning of the presentation, there are reported case decisions that support the proposition that people do not get to develop exactly what they want. They are, as long as they are able to develop something. And I think the risk the city runs if there's absolutely no 0% buildable area of a parcel that it may be considered a taking. So again, unable to give you a bright line. And in terms of the question regarding a subdivision as opposed to a single family lot, I'm going to turn to David to see if he has anything to add.
So I agree with what Lisa said. I would add that so long as you have a relief valve built into your code that would allow for reasonable use of the property, that you could typically avoid a takings claim. However, what that would mean is that if you had a property that was entirely encumbered by wetland, stream, slope, and buffers, or any combination thereof, that you would have to allow for a reasonable amount of development on that lot. That's one of the other docket items that we received, is to set what is considered reasonable. We think that's something we should take up with the critical areas ordinance. I think the Planning Commission agreed on that and made recommendations to that effect. The issue there is that you can require the area that is protected by critical areas rules to be put into an easement, but you have to allow the area that's developed to not be put in an easement. So, and I had done this through many permits in the past in other cities where we required that if you had a vacant lot and you wanted to build a house on it and it had a wetland, that you were able to do buffer averaging or buffer reduction as part of the for the property, that you would then put the resultant buffer and wetland into a native growth protection easement. So there's two types of native growth controls that you would see on properties. There's what is called a native growth protection area, which is a tract. So when someone creates a native growth protection area, it's being done through a subdivision. And it's being done where they're setting aside an area as a separate tract parcel that is typically under the responsibility of the homeowners association to maintain. The other type of native growth protective treatment is a native growth protection easement, an NGPE. And that is where the project is not going through some sort of land division, and it's creating a development on a lot that's encumbered, and that you would set aside in a native growth easement, which limits future development of that area on the property. And it also helps notify subsequent owners of that restraint or that restriction on the property. So it's very helpful, because when we ask for a title report from somebody, we see it pop up. Or we look at the title on King County records, it's super easy to find. Versus looking at an aerial photograph and trying to know whether there's a wetland there. It's a lot easier to see.
So Dave, because just so maybe it's clear for me, is so when you do like a conservation easement on a piece of property and you sell your development rights in a sense for that, is that what this native growth protection easement is doing? Or is it, like I heard you saying earlier, that subsequently later on somebody could come buy that piece of property and then say, I need reasonable use, and so it gets developed anyway?
So it would typically happen, it's a reactive requirement. So it happens when someone is proposing to build a home on a vacant lot. I mean, the easiest scenario is you have a vacant lot,
and then they set it aside. I understand that part. I mean, because to be transparent here to everyone, I have a lot. My property is in the landslide hazard with the overlay. So I'm very familiar when I bought my property exactly what I was buying when I bought it. I knew exactly what I wanted to do it. I wanted to restore it. I wanted to reforest it. Okay, so I get what like the good guy wants to do who loves the environment. All right, I get that. I guess I'm a little hesitant to, I mean, because you can see then, David, from just our little conversation here, how much time and energy these docketed items are going to take with staff involvement. So at this point, I'm not supportive of the motion. Thank you.
Okay, and the only comment I have, because I get to go next, is my concern is on 2A. I feel like we're kind of opening up, Pandora's box here with that one. And I just feel like staff time, we haven't even gotten to January 1st. We haven't even gotten to, when we go on retreat and we give them a list of things that we want to make as a priority. We haven't even gotten that far. So to all of a sudden call out something that I think is going to end up being a black hole, I'm just really apprehensive to do. So I am going to vote against the motion because I just think 2A is, I just think 2A is a black hole. So, okay. Is there anybody else, now that we've gone completely around? Is there any?
I'd like to offer an amendment to my motion.
Okay.
So I would like to remove 2A from my motion. So my motion would just be for 1A and 1C.
Second.
Why don't we just have a fresh motion? Wouldn't that make more sense than voting on your amendment and then voting on making it amended?
I am happy to do that. I move that we docket items 1A and 1C. I believe they can potentially be put together per staff if staff sees fit, and that for 1A, we take the recommendations of Mr. Pyle that we include the other steep, slopey items that he mentioned.
Second.
In his description.
Okay, so it would be for items 1A and 1C and steep, slopey items.
Per Mr. Pyle's recommendation when he described them.
And I guess that's, and give me an S. Like for FAMA or something. Never mind. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Let me look in the chat box here. Okay, I see Councilman, whoops, hang on. Maybe I don't. Deputy Mayor?
Thanks. I'd like David to repeat exactly what, let's, instead of saying steep, slopey things, let's really define that. So what is it exactly?
I thought that was a great technical term.
Thank you.
Evan, can you flip it back to 1A? Apply the native growth protection easement as currently done for subdivisions to single-family residences on existing lots for wetlands and wetland boundaries, as well as tree retention areas. So I would expand that to say wetlands, wetland buffers, streams, stream buffers, tree retention areas, and steep slopes and steep slope, top of slope buffer and toe of slope buffer.
Okay, thank you for
that's what I want.
Well, but he also added in there a couple of extra things on, streams, which are not on here. So your motion, does it also encompass the streams that he just mentioned?
I would like my motion to include all of the items that Mr. Pyle listed.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Powell, could you repeat, because I heard streams on there, could you repeat then the list of items that would be in there?
Yeah, 1A would read, apply the native growth protection easement as currently done for subdivisions to single-family residences on existing lots for wetlands, wetland buffers, streams, stream buffers, top or steep slope critical areas, and top of slope buffers and toe of slope buffers, as well as tree retention areas, period.
Okay, questions?
Very eloquent, Mr. Pyle. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. And this is for you, Mr. Pyle, do you have any sort of, off the top of your head, of what we're talking time-wise for your department on this?
I think that depends on the conversation that happens after the 1st of January with the council based on council priorities and work plan.
Okay. Any other questions by council? Okay. Then I'm going to ask Mr. Sugg for a roll vote, please.
Mayor Moran.
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Aye.
Councilmember Ross.
Councilmember Ross, we couldn't hear you. I think it was an aye, though.
It was an aye.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Aye.
Councilmember Treen.
Aye.
Okay, I think that was a 7-0 vote. Excellent.
Thank you, council.
Thank you, Mr. Pyle. Okay, now on to new business, which is number 29. And Eastside Fire and Rescue nonprofit formation. And I do believe I saw Chief Clark on here. I hope he's still on here. And Chief, are you on? Chief Clark? Well, I know he's not quiet and shy.
I saw Chief Lawrence here earlier, Karen.
Okay.
Chief Clark's listed on there. Now he's in there twice.
Karen, Mayor, can you hear me now?
I knew you weren't that quiet. There he is.
Oh, hang on. I want to make sure I don't have an echo here. My computer just went out, so I'm on my phone now. So, all right, tell me if I start to echo, please.
Okay.
I'm going to do my best here. Okay. So, thank you. Oh, there it is. Let's see. All right. Thank you again for having me on this item. So I was here to see you a couple months ago, and we went over this matter just as a reminder. Back in 2015, Eastside started discussing this concept. It was tabled. There was never any action taken on this back then. We brought it back up in 2019, and we started a comprehensive review of all types of organization, of how to set up our organizational structure. And it started with the Finance and Administration Committee as delegated by the EFR board, and we went through several different concepts. We decided that the governmental nonprofit was the appropriate place to achieve our goals. So we started working with attorneys to draft the paperwork. Back in June-ish, the EFR FAC recommended this to the board. The board in July referred all documents to the city staffs and the fire district staffs,
who then did legal review, and that's when I visited you the first time back in September. Then we considered this as an item in October at our October 8th meeting for the EPR board, and the EPR board unanimously approved moving towards this governmental nonprofit. And the last step now is that the 5 partners ratify the documents so that we can then move towards the nonprofit. To date, you're actually the last to consider the ratification. The other 4 entities have passed it, with North Bend passing it earlier tonight. So after this, if you were to vote in approval of these documents, we would then file for articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State. From there, we would then ask our attorneys to file with the IRS to have federal designation as a nonprofit. And finally, our effective date would be the date that we file with the Secretary of State. Right now, we are tentatively planning for that date to be March 1st of 2021 to give staff time to do the proper paperwork, transition of financial documents and that kind of thing. And strategically, we sit a new board in February of every month or of every year. The Secretary of State filing that has to occur every year for a nonprofit needs to list the board of directors for that year. So if we file every March, we will have just seated a board the month prior every year, so we can keep those documents as up to date as possible. So that's why our goal is March 1st. There are no financial implications from this. We have, as far as costs or anything, as a reminder, the goals that we set forth for the FAC back when we were considering the organizations were to, 1, share the liability for the employer of record across all partners. Number 2 was to establish a joint entity that can actually own assets. And number 3 was to ensure that employees remain governmental employees. So this meets all 3 of those goals. It has been well vetted through attorneys and through staff. And of course, now this is our attempt to vet this one last time with the last elected body. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have related to this item.
Okay, Council, I know we probably will have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to go again. I'll do a round robin. If you have nothing, just say pass. And let's start with Deputy Mayor.
Actually, I'd like to just, I don't have any questions. We've kind of tackled this several times, so I'd like to go ahead and make a motion, and then we can just do discussion on that. So I move that we approve the formation of the Eastside Fire and Rescue into a nonprofit corporation.
Second.
Second.
Well, aren't we agreeable? Everybody second.
I believe Chris Ross got the jump on that one. Councilmember Ross, good job.
Okay, and Deputy Mayor, do you have any questions? No questions. Okay.
Nope, no questions.
Councilmember Gamblin?
Yeah, this has already been, no, I don't have any questions.
Councilmember Ritchie?
Pass. Ready to vote.
All the questions.
Wow. Anybody have any questions? Oh, come on, nobody just...
I just have one. Did I hear you say Chief Clark? I have one.
All right.
I have one.
Oh, good. Okay.
Because I want to give him a hard time.
There you go.
Did I hear you say we're the last elected body?
Yes, you are. You and North Bend were both scheduled tonight. They did theirs on consent, so it passed in the early part of their meeting.
All right. Well, better late than never, so they say, right?
You had till December 30th, though, so you're not late. Didn't want to imply you're late at all.
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Okay, and then Chief, I had one question for you, and this just want to make sure that we were on the record for is, so were you rooting for the Packers or the Bears on Sunday?
For you, Mayor, the Packers. For Councilmember Ross, the Bears.
I knew you'd get that one. All right, so we have a motion and a second on the table. No questions. Do you want to call the roll on this one? Mr. Sudd?
No.
Mayor Moran?
Aye.
Deputy Mayor Malchow?
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin?
Aye.
Councilmember Ritchie,
Aye.
Councilmember Ross,
Aye.
Councilmember Stewart,
Aye.
Councilmember Treen.
Aye.
And that passes 7-0.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chief.
Okay, so the next thing we have up is council reports and city manager reports. So council members, does anybody have anything they wanted to report on? Councilmember Stewart, I saw your hand kind of go up. Is that you?
Yeah, tomorrow I will be attending the SCA, and I sent everyone the materials. So if you have any feedback, I will be representing Sammamish and voting on those items. So please take a look at those. And I also forwarded you. We have a GMPC meeting tomorrow as well. There's nothing on the agenda to be voted on, but there are materials that I shared with you.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody else have anything? Okay, I wanted to just go through real quick. We had our mayor's lunch call today, and I just wanted to, a lot of cities still working on their budgets. Redmond is still working on their budget. There was a little frustration in having new council members that wanted everything now. And so that seemed to be the tone of the mayor feeling like she was trying to get them to understand everything didn't just happen right now. So it was interesting. Shoreline apparently in their budget was calling for the closing of their aquatic center and pool, and they were going to be doing some layoffs. And Kirkland, for anybody who, and this is me, this is one of the first restaurants we went to when we moved here, Hector's closed this morning. And so Hector's is closed now, but will be opening up again, I guess, in a year at a different location, because that building will be torn down either late this week or beginning of next week. And Duval, they said their revenues continue to go up. Unfortunately, their council continues to spend more money than what's in the budget. Bellevue, Bellevue is in the midst of a budget task where they're going to be putting in a multicultural center. So that's pretty cool. I thought that was interesting. Kenmore has lost a council person. Apparently somebody was just really not adjusting well with the new council folks that came on board, just a complete difference of opinion, I guess. And so they've lost it. And the new council came on board and completely axed the planning commission. So yeah, so I guess it's fun days in Kenmore. And so they're having a rough time down there. Anyway, we're up there, down there, up there, around there. Anyway, so it was, it's always good to get information from some of the other cities because everybody has struggles. And it was also that lesson out there to remind everybody that, you know what, we're in the middle of of COVID, and sometimes it just pays to, remember, be kind. Everybody's having a hard time. Okay, city manager report.
Hi, Mayor, Council. Just one issue. Lita and I spoke this evening, and I've not heard of anyone, the mayor has not either, about anyone needing the study session that is calendared for next week on December 8th. So if there's no need for that meeting, Lita will proceed with sending out the appropriate notices tomorrow, canceling that scheduled study session. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, don't start all that hooting and hollering. Okay, guys.
Mayor, we have an executive session, I believe, don't we?
Nope, that was only if necessary.
Were we going to discuss the performance of an employee this week?
Well, that was what I asked. I called and talked to Ken yesterday, and he said you guys were not ready for that.
Well, I beg to differ. I think we need some guidance. We have some ideas, and we'd like to throw past the council. So I think it's worth 5 or 10 minutes of our time, seeing how we're not meeting next week, and we have one more meeting before the end of the year. I think that'd be an appropriate usage of our time.
Okay. So I got a question for Lisa. Can we do that? And for the rest of the committee, are you ready for that?
As a legal matter, you can, as long as you announce the correct citation in the RCW. However, as a practical matter, it's really up to the chair and the rest of the council if you desire to do that.
Okay, and for the rest of the committee, I mean, I'd want to hear from the rest of the committee if they're all... Kent?
Mayor,
Committee again? I don't remember.
Mayor, all we've done is exchange 2 emails with some very, very basic ideas on what might work. I don't feel we're close to presenting any type of solutions or ideas to the council as a whole.
Okay.
Kent?
Can I suggest that we might use the time in executive session to allow the committee to chat and the council can help participate there? We only have one.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, we're running out of time here.
I would agree. We have to have some framework in order to move forward. So the next meeting
Mayor, this is Jason. As a member of the committee, I would like to get council input because this is not a presentation time, obviously. This is more of to get your direction on what you think we should do as far as how these things are going to roll out. We don't have any other meetings scheduled before our final meeting of the year.
Okay, well, I guess I would feel better if I had a direction that was the entire committee was here on board with. And I'm not getting that from you three.
Can I move that we have an executive session to discuss this? Can I make a motion for that and we'll take a vote and see if we to have this discussion?
Second.
Okay, well, we've got a motion and a...
I mean, we're running out of time, and if the committee needs some input or we can make some progress tonight, we kick the can down the road. We got to do something, right?
It's not looking to me like that's what they want, so don't really want to push that. So, okay. Okay. I'm not going to do that. Would you please...
Mayor Moran?
Nay.
Deputy Mayor Malchow?
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin?
Nay.
Councilmember Ritchie?
Aye.
Councilmember Ross?
Aye.
Councilmember Stewart?
Aye.
Councilmember Treen?
Abstain.
You can't.
I think abstain counts as an aye, right?
Yep.
It does.
All right, I guess we are going into executive session. And Lisa, can you read the code for that?
Sure. It is RCW 11. If somebody has it before I pull it up on the screen, feel free to volunteer it. I'm looking at the RCWs right now.
If you can pull up the last
it's a city
agenda,
clerk
it's probably
here.
not there, right?
Hello? I've got it here in front of me. RCW 42.30.110.1.g.
Okay, and it's for 15 minutes. So returning back at 9:15. Check, check.
Please enter your access code followed. To enable audio controls, please.
Okay.
Let's type it in the chat.
I think this is why we have a deputy mayor. What do you think?
This is true. If she's off, then we'll just do this.
Okay.
Karen, can you hear us?
Yep, check. Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay, we've got a motion and a second already to adjourn.
All right. Motion and a second. All in favor say, oops. First of all, I want to announce that there will be a meeting next week. We have not canceled that meeting. So stay tuned on that one. And it'll be canceled if we can, but it is going to stay on the calendar. Okay. And now we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. You guys have a good week.